Hello and welcome to Pemberley and Beyond. I'm Kat, your guide through the ever-expanding world of Jane Austen-inspired fan fiction. Expect new lives, new loves, fresh drama, and the tropes that just keep turning up, rather like Wickham at the door of a wealthy young heiress. In this episode, we are stepping away from the world of Pride and Prejudice and instead embarking on an adventure of an altogether different Persuasion. That's right, this episode's JAFF novel is a retelling of Persuasion. It stood out for me from the crowd thanks to its desi, which, for those of you who are coming across the word for the first time, means people, products, or cultures of the Indian subcontinent and their diaspora. But yes, this desi take on one of my top 6 of Austen's official completed works. If you know, you know. So, pour yourselves a cup of something warming. I've opted for the caffeine hit of a matcha, and I hope you're comfortable because today we are diving into a book that is as much about food, family, and ambition as it is about love and royal intrigue. Yes, I'm talking about Sonali Dev's Recipe for Persuasion. Published in 2020, it is a novel that fuses the grandeur of the desi romance genre with the familiar tropes of JAFF. This book provoked a lot of soul-searching and even some Googling, as it spoke volumes, not just in terms of romance, but about tradition, agency, culture, and culture wars. But as always, I am getting ahead of myself, so please relax and allow the blurb music to wash over you, because we need ambiance to support the saffron storm that Sonali Dev cooked up in this novel. Chef Ashna Raje desperately needs a new strategy. How else can she save her beloved restaurant and prove to her estranged, overachieving mother that she isn't a complete screw-up? When she's asked to join the cast of Cooking with the Stars, the latest hit reality show teaming chefs with celebrities, it seems like just the leap of faith she needs to put her restaurant back on the map. She's a chef. What's the worst that could happen? Rico Silva. That's what. Being paired with a celebrity who was her first love, the man who ghosted her at the worst possible time in her life, only proves what Ashna has always believed. Leaps of faith are a recipe for disaster. World Cup winning soccer star Rico Silva isn't too happy to be paired up with Ashna either. Losing Ashna years ago almost destroyed him. The only silver lining to this bizarre situation is that he can finally prove to Ashna that he is definitely over her. But when their catastrophic first meeting goes viral, social media becomes obsessed with their chemistry. The competition on the show is fierce, and so is the simmering desire between Ashna and Rico. Every minute they spend together rekindles feelings that pull them towards their disastrous past. Will letting go again be another recipe for heartbreak, or a recipe for persuasion? Now, based on that blurb, would you not expect a tale that places the romance element to the forefront of the story? Would you not be expecting some sort of frothy confection with lashings of cream, jam, and some sparkly sprinkles on top? Yeah, that was the mistake I made. But before we delve into the real story, let's dive into the tropes that shaped this tale. Or actually, let's not. Now, normally I would talk about the 3 tropes that moved me most, but the further through this novel that I got, the more I felt that the entirety of the novel's cultural backdrops were actually those mirrors you find in fun houses, you know? The ones that contort your body in the most fantastical ways and leave you questioning what's what. Actually, scratch that. The cultural backdrops and the characters themselves were the funhouse, and by the end I was left wondering which way was up. Strap in and follow me down this rabbit hole. As charming as this novel is at times, the narrative is also studded with cues that, on a politically illiterate reading, start to shimmer a bit differently. For a casual reader, Ashna's life and heritage might simply read as the unglamorous story of a descendant of Indian royalty living in the US. On the one hand, she's a cosmopolitan, urbane woman. On the other, she is deeply tied to her family and her heritage. She also carries the unbearable legacy of her father's suicide and the PTSD it has left in its wake, whilst fighting against a love that her late father loathed with every fibre of his being. And I know you're wondering where the heck I'm going with this. But Kat, I can imagine you saying, this story slots neatly into the Austen romance lineage. Here we've got a heroine constrained by family duty, haunted by the past, and torn between desire and expectation. It feels familiar. It feels like, I don't know, Persuasion by Jane Austen? And yes, on some level, it is like that. But for readers attuned to the political textures of India and its diaspora, these very same details take on a second register. Suddenly, the tragic father becomes more than a forbidding patriarch. His language and that of his father-in-law's echoes modern Hindutva rhetoric. Her mother's accolades and public service projects, all of which are so inspiring and girl-boss coded on the surface, begin to read like carefully curated symbols of upper-caste nationalist pride. Even Ashna's vegetarian recipes, desire to attend yoga sessions, and all of those typically South Californian markers start to look less like universal signifiers of wellness in a self-care loving world and more like saffron-tinted markers of identity. Now, this is where we have to talk about saffronization, because I keep talking about saffron like she's one of the heathers, the Winona Ryder one, not the plant. Saffronization is a term that refers to the deliberate reframing of India's history, culture, and public life in the saffron colour associated with Hindu nationalism, also known as Hindutva. It's not just a metaphor. Saffronization involves recasting historical narratives so that Hindu contributions and those of groups such as Sikhs and Jains are glorified. Muslim and Christian influences are diminished, and cultural practices are aligned with upper caste Hindu ideals. In schools, it has meant rewriting textbooks to centre Hindu kings and downplay Mughal rule. In public discourse, it shows up in calls to rename cities, monuments, or foods to erase foreign influences. And in the media, it shows up in the arrest of comedians and other prominent figures for, and I quote, hurting religious sentiments. Why does this matter here? Because saffronization is not just an academic squabble over history. According to a 2021 Pew Research report, 84% of Indians said that to be truly Indian, it is very important to respect all religions. But in the same survey, 64% of Hindus said that being Hindu is important for a truly Indian identity. According to the most recent figures I could find from 2011, almost 8 in 10 Indians are Hindus. And by 2022, India scored only 2 out of 4 for religious freedom. What I'm trying to say is these aren't fringe ideas. They show how nationalist thinking has crept into mainstream identity, reshaping how people see themselves and each other, both inside and outside India. In everyday life, this takes subtler forms, privileging vegetarianism as true Indian culture, or lionizing elite Hindu women as models of modern yet traditional femininity. But it doesn't stop with soft-touch rhetoric. There are narratives springing up about peoples of different faith and immigrants that are going to be far from alien to people from Western countries. Now, I cannot speak for how listeners from the West may feel about similar changes to their nation's discourse around these subjects, but I can say that for some Indians and their diaspora, that saffronization represents a narrowing of India's pluralistic identity into a homogenized Hindu one, erasing the complexity of a society built on centuries of cultural mixing, sharing, and understanding. Put simply, saffronization doesn't just reshape obscure political debates, it changes the very fabric of everyday life. What food is acceptable, which figures are celebrated, which jokes get to be told, even who gets to be seen as the ideal Indian citizen. And once you know where to look, you see these saffron threads woven tightly into the fabric of this novel. Take Shaban, Ashna's mother. She is lionized in the story. A Padma Shri awardee in 2020, a celebrated cricket player for India's women's national team, and a hands-on participant in a very Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, or Clean India campaign, coded charity, work that's led to her being nominated for the 4th highest civilian award in India, the Padma Shri. On the surface, she's an inspiring feminist role model, but in the saffronized register, her accolades are telling. The Padma Shri has historically highlighted Muslim contributions to India's cultural fabric, with Muslims making up about 17% of recipients. Yet Shaban's award sits comfortably within a recent nationalist shift that elevates the Hindu figures while sidelining others. Similarly, cricket, once a messy plural space where Muslim and Hindu stars alike could be national icons, has, in recent years, been drawn into Hindutva's orbit. From the targeting of individual Muslim players for disloyalty after team losses to saffron-clad rallies around matches, the sport itself has been conscripted into nationalist theatre. That Shaban's sporting past is offered as a badge of honour places her neatly within this saffron-coded lineage. Furthermore, Shaban's love story is framed in equally telling ways. Her father forbids her relationship with Omar in language that is unmistakably love jihad rhetoric. Hey, mentions of a trope. When Shaban mentions that she is in love with Omar, he forbids their relationship. He says, "I'll make sure you don't throw your life away on a servant's son from a religion that seeks to annihilate ours. I will not let you forsake your religion and heritage." For a Western reader, this might slip under the radar as a standard foreboding father trope. The stern patriarch who thunders against an unsuitable suitor is practically a genre convention. But for politically aware readers, this moment reads very differently. The father's words are not just about class or family pride, they echo the rhetoric of Hindutva voices in India today. People who seek to police interfaith marriages under the banner of so-called love jihad. That term, for anyone unfamiliar, refers to a conspiracy theory promoted by Hindu nationalist groups, which alleges that Muslim men deliberately seduce Hindu women in order to convert them. It's an idea that has been weaponized in recent years to justify surveillance of couples, harassment, and even state-level laws restricting interfaith unions. So when Shaban's father rails against her love for Omar as a threat to religion and heritage, it isn't just personal prejudice, it is a dog whistle. It is the very same language deployed to justify real-life violence and discrimination in India today. And here's the kicker. The novel never pushes back. Now, don't get me wrong, a story doesn't always need to stop and spell out that a view is repugnant for us to know it is repugnant. Think of Humbert Humbert. Think of Mr. Burling in An Inspector Calls insisting the Titanic is unsinkable. We don't need Priestley to pop up on stage to tell us he's wrong. The Titanic sank decades before the play was written. Or take Grindelwald in Harry Potter, waxing lyrical about wizarding supremacy. Harry's quest to destroy Voldemort, a wizard who parrots the same bigoted beliefs as Grindelwald, shows us why Grindy's ideas are poisonous. But let me transpose this relationship trope. Imagine a white father in a 1900s set romance forbidding his daughter from marrying a Jewish man on grounds of racial preservation, with no narrative rebuttal. Oh, and then 20 years later, she rekindles that romance but keeps it hidden from the world, even though she and he appear to be in a position strong enough for them to publicly reveal that relationship. No, the absence of critique is deafening, because that's what happens in the nationalist-friendly sheen of Shaban's character development. She stays silent. Near the novel's end, almost as an aside, we learn that she has kept her lifelong love with Omar, a lower-caste Muslim scriptwriter, private. She chooses concealment. This isn't a choice that can usually be kept concealed. In the Indian context, an upper-caste Hindu princess falling in love with a Muslim man would be nothing short of explosive. Couples across the country still face harassment, police action, even mob violence for far less. To admit the relationship publicly would be to detonate the saffronized persona that shields Shaban and gives her status. So she doesn't. For diaspora readers, this contradiction is telling. Shaban is presented as a woman who fights for the marginalized, yet she refuses to use her considerable privilege, including the protection of her American passport, to stand openly by the man she claims to love. It diminishes her. It undercuts the novel's repeated insistence that she always does the right thing, especially where ethics are concerned. And that's because in what's arguably the most crucial narrative in a love story, she does not stand up for her love. And this is where I felt the novel broke with Austen's conventions, and not in a bold, groundbreaking way, but in a way that weakens its resonance. Because marrying for love, in defiance of family, status, and social censure, is at the heart of Austen's narratives. Anne Elliot should have married Captain Wentworth the first time around. The entire plot of Persuasion turns on how wrong she was to let herself be persuaded otherwise. Elizabeth Bennet refuses Lady Catherine de Bourgh's command to deny her engagement to Darcy. In Austen's world, characters who choose love despite the odds are vindicated. Characters who choose secrecy or social compromise are punished. Think Lucy Steele and Edward Ferrars, Marianne Dashwood and Willoughby, Jane Fairfax and Frank Churchill. In every case, secrecy corrodes happiness. Now, I know what you might say, but Kat, Omar and Shaban live together. That's practically the same as marriage in this day and age. But it isn't. Not in Austen's terms, and not in the Indian context Dev is writing into. Serious attachments, as Austen and many a romance reader understand them, are public and binding. To keep them hidden is at best to show a flagrant disregard for sincerity, and at worst to court disaster. And in case anyone's about to go for the obvious counterpoint which springs to mind, consider the Marriage Act of 1753 in England, which required marriages to be publicly registered, legally witnessed, and conforming to church rules. It reinforced the social order and curtailed irregular unions. None of Austen's heroines successfully marries across class lines. The Act made such marriages nearly impossible, but that law was repealed in the 19th century. Times have changed. 3 centuries on, marriage across class, caste, or culture should not be the insurmountable barrier it once was. Look, for instance, at King Harold V of Norway, who declared he would only reign if he could marry Sonia, a commoner. Spoiler, he did, and she became the Queen of Norway. That was in the 1960s. If European royalty can defy centuries of hierarchy in the name of love, surely a fictional Indian princess in 2020 should not have to keep her Muslim partner hidden. And yet Siobhan does, and the narrative lets her. Which is why the absence of critique, the silence around the dog whistle, is not just disappointing, but deafening. Ashna's coping mechanisms shimmer with saffron undertones too. Every recipe she and Rico create is vegetarian. She repeatedly talks about needing to do some yoga to center herself. This sounds South Californian as can be, charming lifestyle details. But in Hindutva discourse, vegetarianism and yoga are not neutral. They are badges of true Hindu identity, often wielded in exclusionary ways. What reads as quirky self-care for a diaspora heroine doubles, in political context, as cultural signaling. And yet the novel complicates this picture by introducing Ashna's cousin, Yash, running for governor in California. His Calicare for All platform, cutting private insurers out of healthcare, lowering premiums, eliminating deductibles, is pure Democrat-coded policy. For an American reader, this is recognizable progressive politics. But placed along Siobhan's saffron-coded accomplishments and Bram's unchallenged love jihad rhetoric, it produces cultural whiplash. 2 worlds, Hindutva-tinged India and liberal American democracy, are spliced together without the friction being fully acknowledged. And maybe that's the real bittersweet legacy of this novel. Ashna gets her trope-filled, Austen-worthy reunion with Rico. Tropes like food as agency, forced proximity as comedy, love restored after years apart are some of the tropes that shone through the novel. But Shaban is left stranded. A reminder that saffronization doesn't just colour public life, it reaches into the most intimate corners of women's existence, dictating which loves can be spoken and which must remain forever in the shadows. Now look, I've rabbited on about this for far longer than I expected I would, probably because I have incredibly strong feelings about this. To stop this episode running for an hour, we're going to skip on to the episode's companion read. To my mind, this is like a wine and cheese pairing, only for books. Every episode, I usually take one prominent trope from the main fan fiction book and recommend a second novel, one not set in the Austen verse that contains the same trope but done differently. Magic, right? That's why I call them my hocus tropus. For this episode, I'm going to sidestep the thorny trope-based recommendations and instead recommend A Fine Balance by Rohinton Mistry. Mistry was, incidentally, awarded the Padma Shri Award in 1999 for his contribution to Indian literature, but that wasn't my main reason for recommending this novel.
A Fine Balance shines a light on the treatment of untouchables during the 1970s. It might sound dry when I put it like that, but in reality it's a sweeping, deeply human story that imagines caste, privilege, and survival in ways that resonate uncomfortably with the subtle caste and class cues we just unpacked in Recipe for Persuasion. Where Sonali Deb's novel plays with saffronization, coded privilege, and the quiet policing of relationships, Mystery's story confronts caste and social hierarchy head-on. Here, the consequences of structural inequality are brutal and inescapable, and in several cases their ramifications are etched into my brain with surgical, nightmarish precision. Reading it immediately after Recipe for Persuasion offers a sharp contrast. While Deb's world shows how elite privilege and nationalist ideology can be cloaked in glamour, A Fine Balance reminds us that the legacies of caste, gender, and systemic oppression are inescapable lived realities for millions. It's a literary mirror that reflects both the fantasy of power and blows the smoke away, revealing its tangible consequences, making the political subtext in Dev's romance all the more striking. Just as Dev embeds vegetarianism, yoga, and cuisine as cultural signifiers in Ashna's narrative, Mystery weaves food, domestic space, and everyday labour into his characters' lives to illuminate social hierarchies. Both novels, in very different ways, show how what seems like mundane life, the meals we eat, the spaces we inhabit, the traditions we follow, is deeply enmeshed with identity, power, and politics. While Ashna wields food as agency and self-expression, Mystery's characters often endure food scarcity, discrimination, labour as imposed circumstance, and even torture. The contrast is stark, but instructive. Finally, both books explore relationships constrained by societal forces. In Recipe for Persuasion, both Ashna and Shaban navigate love, family expectation, and interfaith taboos, often in ways softened for the romance genre and, I suspect, for the American audience that this novel is aimed at. In A Fine Balance, bonds between characters are tested under relentless social and political pressures, showing the stakes of inequality without the narrative buffer of glamour or comedy. Taken together, the two novels give a layered view of India, the diasporic, idealized, saffron-tinted fantasy of the wealthy, versus the lived, often harrowing realities of caste, class, and social control. So, if you're looking to follow a glitzy, foodie-infused romance with a reading that grounds you in the real, messy politics of India, A Fine Balance is a perfect choice. It's a book that stays with you long after you've put it down, forcing you to reflect on privilege, history, and the narratives we choose to tell or to hide. And with this hocus-trocus recommendation charmingly bespelled to you, I'm going to hop down from my digital soapbox and make my way backstage, as it were, to Cat's Corner, the part of the show where I pour us all another cuppa and spend a minute or two talking about whatever's on my mind. Over the last few weeks, I've been thinking about the links between food and culture. I've been working in a supermarket bakery here in New Zealand. One of the unexpected joys of this working holiday has been learning the little cultural quirks that show up in recipes. It turns out you can tell a surprising amount about a place just by what it bakes and what it calls a treat. Take lolly cake, for example. If you've never had it, as I hadn't before I moved here, imagine squishy pastel-coloured marshmallow-type lollies from Rainbow Confectionery, chopped up and bound together with crushed biscuits, melted butter and condensed milk, then rolled in coconut. No baking required, just maximum nostalgia. Every Kiwi I've spoken to seems to have some memory of it from their childhood. It's the cake of school fairs, birthday parties, and family picnics. It's not haute cuisine, but it doesn't need to be. It's about memory, joy, and belonging. Then there are Afghan biscuits, a chocolatey, cornflakey, crunchy cookie, topped with chocolate icing and half a walnut. They're rugged and a little bit odd to look at when you first see them, but very deeply beloved. The origin of their name is hazy and, yes, potentially a bit uncomfortable when you start tugging at it, but they're a proud Kiwi staple. They're the sort of biscuit that reminds you culture is always shifting. Something imported, something adapted, something made into ours over time. For me, learning to make these Kiwi recipes has been a way of getting to understand not only how New Zealanders celebrate, but also how they see themselves. And reading Dev's novel felt a bit like that too. Tasting the familiar through a new recipe, catching the sweetness and contradictions baked into every bite. And maybe that's the real joy of baking, whether it's lolly cake for a Kiwi supermarket or Ashna and Rico's churros in Recipe for Persuasion. Recipes are rarely just recipes. They're as full of meaning as Darcy's first proposal or Wentworth's letter, carrying whole histories of where we come from and how we live together. So the next time you bite into a slice of cake or attack a custard square, think of it not just as a sweet treat, but as a story, one that, like Austen's novels, tells us who we are and what we value. Because whether it's cake or courtship, food or fiction, it all comes down to connection. And that, dear listener, is the most magical recipe of all. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this episode. If you've made it this far, consider following this podcast so you can join me on future rambles through the wilds of JAFF. Until next time, may your tea stay hot, your tropes well executed, and your Mr. Darcy tolerable, I suppose.